Hi, my name is Malin, and this is my presentation on name trends and patterns and the end of Gen Alpha in the United States. This presentation is really long. I've been working on it since January, and right now it's the end of May. So it's going to be split up into several parts. This part's focusing on pop culture trends and how famous people or fictional characters affect baby names. So I want to start by talking a bit about the data if you're unfamiliar. So this is US baby name data from the Social Security Administration, which you'll just see abbreviated to SSA. Territories are not included in this dataset, but they are available separately. The dataset only includes names with five or more occurrences for in uh, each year for privacy reasons. So all names is not technically all names, but it's over 90% depending on the year. So the earliest year of data is 1880, and in the early years, I'd say till about 1920, there's a lot of under registration. So it's not even close to the total amount of babies born, but it's still probably a good measure of what names were more popular and maybe how much more popular they were. And obviously, the latest year is 2024. I'm recording this in 2025. The 2024 data was at least about 2 weeks ago, that's that's just the most current version right now. And as I said, the earlier years may not include every baby. It certainly does not. As for the names, only the English alphabet is allowed, and there's also no numbers, spaces, hyphens, or apostrophes allowed. So this does mean that if you have like Marianne hyphenated versus Marianne with those space, those are both going to be counted along with Marianne as one word. So with every name I present, I work under the assumption that if the change is large enough, if the person or the source is well known enough, and if I can't find any other explanation for a very sudden and large increase, then surely the two must be related in some capacity. And obviously, correlation does not equal causation. We all know that. But I mean, I've looked at enough names that pop culture certainly does affect baby name trends. The question is just kind of like which names and how much. All right, now let's get started by diving into pop culture trends and how certain people or fictional characters impacted baby name trends in the United States. This is going to be organized by the type of thing that triggered the increase. So we're going to start with fictional characters, then move on to celebrities and other famous people, and then finally kind of like an other. There's just a few in there. So to start with, for the fictional characters, these are the names of a obviously fake person from a book, movie, or a show where the name began increasing immediately following the release of the media. So the first one is Riley and Inside Out. So if you're unfamiliar, Inside Out is a coming-of-age Pixar film about a young girl struggling with her emotions, and Riley is the main character. And so Riley is either from an Irish surname with an unknown meaning or an English surname where it would mean rye clearing. And so this movie was released in 2015. And in 2024, a sequel called Inside Out 2 was also released. And if you look at the graph, you can see it slowly started going up, and it did increase on its own. But in 2015, which is marked by this gray line, you can see the year before was pretty low. It went up quite a bit in 2015 and continued increasing until 2016, where the percent increase from 2014 to 2016 was 49.17. And I will admit, that's not a lot, but you can definitely see it increased quite a bit. And I will add, it was around this point when Riley became more commonly used as a feminine name than a masculine name. Additionally, if we look at 2024, you can see it's been on the decline since 2016, but it was almost exactly level from 2023 to 2024. So the sequel, while it may not have caused an increase, it definitely stopped it from decreasing. And I'm curious to see if maybe it'll be higher in 2025. And there's just a note, it is still more common as a male name in other English-speaking places. And so the male popularity of this name continued decreasing after the movie came out. It didn't experience an increase. Right, the next name is Matilda and the movie Matilda. So Matilda is from a German name meaning strength in battle, and in June of 1996, a movie adaptation of the children's novel Matilda was released. And the name increased a bit rocky, but it increased since then. Overall, it has gone up in the years since 1996. And so the percent increase from 1996 to last year, 2024, is 1,563.17%. Now, my theory on why this has maybe been increasing more so in the last couple of years is maybe millennials watched this movie as a child and then they just liked it and named their daughters Matilda when they got older. Whereas maybe in the start, you had parents whose children, millennials as a child, liked the movie Matilda, and when they had another daughter, they named the kid Matilda. Continuing with the movie Matilda, one of Matilda's friends is a girl named Lavender, where lavender is just referencing the purple flower, lavender. And again, if we look at 1996, we can see that while there was some data before that, it has increased drastically since then, and it's been going up pretty sharply in the last couple years. And so the percent increase from 1996 when the movie released to 2024 was 5,060% increase. Now on this side, we're going to look at two names at once, Romeo and Juliet. So, if you're somehow unfamiliar, Romeo and Juliet is Shakespeare's classic tragedy about a 13-year-old named Juliet and a 17-year-old named Romeo who fall in love and six die. So, here we have Romeo is the red line and Juliet is the orange line. So, first of all, the name Romeo just refers to someone who's from Rome. And Juliet is from a Roman named Julius. It's a feminine form, which means downy bearded. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but that's what the name means. And so in 1968, we have a version of Romeo and Juliet released. I think this is maybe one of the more well-known versions of it. Certainly, it is one I watched in English class when we read Romeo and Juliet. It's the one pictured on the left here. You can see Romeo didn't really increase that much, but Juliet certainly did. But then in 1996, another very popular movie version of Romeo and Juliet was released. We can see that actually both names increased a bit after this movie and kind of have been increasing since then. This version pictured on the right here is the other movie adaptation that I watched in English class. So I think it's fair to say these two are probably the most well known. And so the percent increase from 1968 to 1970 is a 53.19% for Romeo and 115.93 for Juliet. But from 1996 to 2001, it's 331.07% for Romeo and 169.01% for Juliet. So it looks like Romeo increased by a larger percent. That's just because there were less Romeos overall. In case you're thinking that your favorite version of Romeo and Juliet is not one of these two, these are the most successful adaptations in the US. Specifically, obviously, this is United States data, so looking at United States adaptations. All right, next we got Renesmee, which is a portmanteau of Renee and Esme, with both of which are French names. And so this is the name of a baby born to some Twilight characters in the Twilight franchise, which is about vampires and love, as I understand. I never read them. But in August 2008, the Twilight Breaking Dawn book releases, and you can see the gray line here. Previously, there is no data for Renesmee because it was not really a name, but since then. But as you can see, after 2008, that's when there started being data for this name, and it is still kind of going up. It's not overly popular. It's only peaked just below 175 in 2024, but it generally has been trending upwards. And the percent increase from 2008 to 2024 is 17,200%. Next one we're going to look at is Neo and the Matrix. Neo being the main character of the Matrix. So this is from a Greek prefix simply meaning new. And at the end of March in 1999, The Matrix released. This is a movie about like if humans are trapped inside of a virtual world. The virtual world's called The Matrix. Obviously, initially there was a big jump, I think within just the first from 1999 to 2000, big jump, and then it kind of went down, but it stuck around a bit. But then in 2019, Matrix Resurrections was announced, or in late 2019 that was announced. That movie was released in 2021, and so you can see even before it was released, there was a comeback of the name Neo, just a little bit. It's not overly popular, but it did come back for a bit when the sequel was announced. And so the percent increase over that whole time frame, 1998 to 2024, is 23,100%. Now, another character in The Matrix is a woman named Trinity. And so Trinity is just from the English word given in reference to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Although I think, tri means three. You could probably use it to refer to anything in threes. So again, this movie was released in 1999, and you can see it was around for a little bit, and it started increasing kind of on its own. But then The Matrix was released, and it just jumps up within like 2 years from 1999 to 2000. But there was no effect of it coming back with the sequel in 2021. So I'm not sure if she's even in the sequels. But the percent increase from 1998, just before the 1998 down here, to 2004, which is this peak, is a 1,072.14% increase. And Trinity is a lot more popular than Neo, because I think, as you can see, it was used as a name prior to the release of The Matrix, whereas Neo wasn't. Right, the next name's a little interesting, as the name Dexter has kind of three connotations. One of which you might be more familiar with, and that's Dexter Morgan from the show Dexter. But we're going to look at Dexter and Dynasty and Dexter Comics. So first of all, Dexter is an English surname meaning one who dies, with a Y as in, colors. And so in 1948, Dexter Comics were in circulation. You can see that's this first gray line here. It started going up a bit after that, but not super sharp. Then in 1983, a character called Dex first appeared on the soap opera Dynasty, which is about two powerful feuding families, I guess, and that increased pretty sharply afterwards. Then in 2006, of course, the show Dexter premiered, and that not only increased sharply, it increased to the highest point ever. And you can see Dexter Morgan here holding a knife. That's because Dexter is about a man who is a blood spatter analyst by day and a serial killer by night who only kills other criminals. But From 1949 to 1957, roughly this area, there was a 238.19% increase. From 1983 to 1989, there was a 212.73% increase. And from 2006 to 2012, there was a 302.87% increase. I'm not as sure about the comics, but there is definitely an increase here. And as I was just Googling like Dexter 1948, just to see what would come up, that's what I got, and there doesn't seem to be much else. The next name is Justice in the movie Poetic Justice. Now, this one, I do have both male and female data on it because despite the fact that the character Justice is a woman, it did increase for both male and female babies. So Justice is honestly a pretty self-explanatory name. It's either from the English occupational surname referring to a judge or from the English word for justice. In 1993, the movie Poetic Justice was released, and this is after Justice's boyfriend is murdered, she rides with her friend and her friend's boyfriend to Oakland. And so from 1992 to 1995, there is a 2,805% increase for girls. I do notice that the for boys it started increasing just a little bit earlier for some reason, but I think definitely this movie had a big impact. In that same time frame, it did increase 265.85% for boys. It peaked just a few years later and has stuck around as a name, but has also been decreasing. Next name is Harley and the soap opera Guiding Light. So Harley is from an English surname meaning hair clearing. So in 1987, the character of Harley Cooper debuts on Guiding Light, and you can see it marked 1987, and it increased pretty sharply after that. And so the percent increase from 1987 to 1994 is 6,028.57%. In that same time frame, it did increase 317.46 for boys, so it kind of brought the name to attention for both genders, but because the character is a woman, it was more common for female babies. After it kind of stuck around for a bit, I think it had a second increase, probably just because it was being recognized more as a name than it was maybe previously. Next name is Alora in the movie Willow. So the name Alora was probably made up for the movie. I can't find much about it, and that's what it says on behindthename.com, which is where I'm getting all of these name meanings from. But in 1988, the movie Willow was released featuring a baby named Alora Dannon. And compared to recent years, this is a relatively small increase. From 1987 to 1990, it increased 9,000% though, which is pretty large, but in the years following, it's gone up a lot. And names starting with EL or an L sound have been very popular lately. I think people are liking names that they can shorten to Ellie for girls. And so maybe these most recent babies don't have much to do with the movie Willow since that was like what, 30 years ago. But Alora was not a very common name as you can see prior to Willow, but now it kind of is. Next, looking at Tatum and the movie Scream. Tatum is another name that's also become fairly popular lately and is one of the few names that is considered unisex, but started as a female name rather than starting as a male name and becoming unisex. So it's an Old English surname meaning Tata's homestead, and in December of 1996, so very late in the year, the movie Scream is released, and it increased pretty quickly after that. Now, I haven't seen the movie Scream, but from what I understand, it's just a classic slasher film. And while there is data for it before the movie was released, it definitely increased after that, and that maybe brought it to the attention of more parents as it being a name. Maybe they hadn't heard it before. And so the percent increase from 1996 to 1998, just this increase right here, is 239.41%. And I will say, it was in 2023 that male Tatums finally overtook female Tatums and is still more commonly used right now as a male name. I don't really remember how I came across this name, but this is Bonnie and Gone with the Wind. So this is Bonnie, she's a child character in Gone with the Wind. And the name Bonnie is just a Scottish word for pretty. And in 1940, a movie version of the book Gone with the Wind was released. It increased very sharply immediately once the movie was released. It reached its peak maybe a few years later, around maybe 1950, and then it kind of decreased. If you haven't seen Gone with the Wind, which I haven't, it's one of those like old racist movies about the Civil War, and apparently two people die from falling off a horse. The percent increase from 1939 to 1943 is a 120.20% increase, more than doubled. Also, just want to mention, this isn't, from what I can find online, having not seen this movie, Bonnie is not her like given name, it's a nickname. Because again, it's a Scottish word for pretty. Next name is Peyton in the movie The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. So Peyton is an English surname meaning Town, and in 1992, the movie The Hand That Rocks the Cradle was released. This movie is about a doctor who commits suicide after being accused of molesting his pregnant patients. His wife gets a job working for the family of one of the women, but then she like gets all weird and tries to destroy their life. I guess it's kind of like a revenge thing. But what's interesting is that Peyton is the villain of this movie. It's this woman. So right at the start, it has just a small increase, but it does overall keep trending upward until it peaks in 2009. And so the total percent increase from 1991 to 2009 is 7,835.82%. Honestly, I'm gonna say around here, maybe around like 2004, that's probably when other people just started using it because maybe it was getting put in like baby name books. Is like, I do think that after a certain point, it just kind of got a life of its own and stopped being people naming their kid Peyton because of this movie, but that's definitely where it started. And as I said, Peyton is the villain of the movie, which intrigues me because people are watching this thinking, oh, Peyton, that's a nice name for a baby, but Peyton's the villain. Now, this next name is Ramona and the 1928 film Ramona. I originally looked up the name Ramona because I was curious if the Ramona Quimby books that I read as a child had any impact on baby names. In short, they don't, but I found this interesting increase in the 1920s, so I investigated that instead. Ramona is a feminine form of Raymond, which is a Germanic name meaning advice protection. It also could be a feminine form of other forms of Raymond. So in March of 1928, the movie Ramona is released based on the 1884 novel Ramona. So the basic plot of the movie is that a Mexican American woman discovers she is part Native American and identifies as Native American so that she can marry a Native man. And this thing increased really sharply. So just looking at 1927 to 1928, that's a 295.58% increase. It did peak right in the year that it was released, and then it kind of dropped off really fast. But honestly, this graph is just an interesting shape because it obviously peaked because of the movies. It went up again in the late 50s, maybe on its own, maybe there was a reason, I don't know. But then around 2000, that's at the lowest it's ever been, but it's been coming back again. Maybe people are reading Ramona Quimby books again. The actress who plays Ramona is named Dolores Del Rio, and the name Dolores was also increasing sharply at the time and peaked in 1930. When I first found this, I read through like her entire Wikipedia, but that was actually months ago, so I've kind of forgotten it. But basically, Dolores Del Rio was considered to be one of the first major female Latin American like Hollywood actresses. So I guess she was like pretty famous at the time. This next one's a little different. We're looking at Kaylee and the band Marillion. This is not so much a fictional character as it is a song. So Kaylee is simply literally just K plus Lee. And in May of 1985, Marillion released what I think is probably one of their most popular songs, Kaylee. Prior to this, there was no data for this name, but it became pretty popular a generation or so later. And so the percent increase from 1984 to 1986, just this first part right here, is 10,585.71%. There's a lot of talk in the name nerd forums that I lurk in about the Leigh endings, but Kaylee spelled like this is kind of the one that is the original Leigh name. And so I actually did make a graph. I didn't put it in here, but I did graph a lot of different spellings of Kaylee together. And Kaylee spelled Kaylee did come first, but also started increasing along with Kaylee, and a lot of the other spellings increased along with this spelling. So I think this song definitely just brought the name Kaylee in general into the public eye. There were 7 Kaylee spelled like this in 1984, the year before the song was released. But again, as I said, Kaylee spelled Kaylee was around. The next name is Mallory, who's a character on the sitcom Family Ties. It's an English surname meaning unfortunate, and in September of 1982, the sitcom Family Ties premiered. And so Family Ties focuses on the generational differences between the parents and their 3 kids. It's a sitcom, takes place in the 80s, so I'm just gonna guess the kids are boomers, maybe early Gen X. And so the percent increase from 1982 when it first premiered to 1986 up here at the top was 7,288.89%. What I find interesting about this name is that prior to this, there is very little data. This is probably hovering around like less than 100 per year. And then it just jumps so sharply because there is a character on a popular show called Mallory. I mean, I would even say that this show is probably the reason that Mallory is used commonly as a name, whether or not you're naming your kid Mallory and you know about this character or not. Even after it peaked, it sharply decreased, but it's still stuck around. Even now, it's coming back the last couple of years, but around 2020, it was at the lowest it's been since Family Ties was released. But it's still over 500 a year. Like, that's not an unpopular name. Next one we're looking at is Tabitha and Bewitched. So Tabitha is an Aramaic name meaning gazelle. And fun fact, if you've ever heard the name Dorcas, Dorcas is the Greek transcription of Tabitha somehow. I don't know how that works, but it's so interesting to me that you get Dorcas from Tabitha. Anyway, in January of 1966, Tabitha Stevens was born on the show Bewitched. So the show already existed, but her character was like born. And so Bewitched is about a witch who marries a normal man and wants to lead a normal suburban life, and then Tabitha is their child. You can see there was a pretty sharp increase immediately. So from 1965 to 1970, there was a 2,985.29% increase. And while the name was vastly unpopular before that, it stuck around and increased farther in the late 70s and the 80s, but it has been decreasing since then. It hasn't really made a comeback since. Also, I have two spellings up here, and that's because the name was originally spelled Tabitha with three A's in the credits, but it is most commonly spelled Tabitha with an I, which is what is graphed here. They did, I think, in the credits end up switching the way it was spelled, from my understanding of from the Wikipedia. But the name Tabitha with three A's increased 13,940% from 1965 to 1968 in just like 3 years. So Tabitha with three A's is actually one of the largest rank jumps, which I discussed in another video. And that's the end of the fictional characters, so now we're moving on to celebrities. So these are names that are that of an actor, a musician, an athlete, or some other famous person who might be considered a celebrity. These are ones where the name began increasing immediately following a pop culture event, such as maybe a movie or an album release. But unlike the fictional characters, some of them there might be like increases prior to one big increase because maybe the person was already known, but they did something really special or something. First one we're going to look at is the name Reese and Reese Witherspoon. Now, Reese was more commonly a male name until Reese Witherspoon came along. Reese is from the Old Welsh name Rhys, which means enthusiasm. Having seen several movies with Reese Witherspoon, this is a very fitting name for her. And so in 1996, which is maybe right around here, Reese Witherspoon has her breakout roles, which were movies called Fear and Freeway. But then in 2001, marked by this line, we have Legally Blonde releases, in which she's the main character, and that's maybe one of her most well-known movies. And it might be hard to tell just because the line is there, but it does increase a lot sharper after that. Regardless of whether Legally Blonde was like the movie that made Reese become a popular girl's name, there is no data for the name Reese prior to maybe 1990. From 2000 to 2007, the name increased 842.57%, and it did peak for males in 2003. Next name is Ethan and the actor Ethan Hawke. So Ethan is from a Hebrew name that means solid. In June of 1989, the movie Dead Poet Society releases. This is a movie about a bunch of schoolboys and their teacher who they all come to really like as a person and as a teacher, but then he gets fired. It's a sad movie, but it's really good. The name Ethan was fairly steady in the years leading up to this. It had even started just a slight increase on its own, but then Dead Poet Society releases and it shoots up quite a bit, increasing from 1988 to 1999 to 1990, 681.77%. It then had a little bit of a decrease, but then it came back way more and it went on to become a top 10 name for earlier Gen Z boys. Now, Ethan Hawke's at one point wife was Uma Thurman. So Uma is the Sanskrit word for flax, and one of the movies she's probably best known for is Pulp Fiction, which was released in the latter part of 1994, which led to a kind of slower increase of the name. Uma is not a very common name overall. As you can see, it peaked at just over 80. But then in 1999, where there's the second increase, there's another pretty sharp increase. A movie called Sweet and Low Down releases. I've not seen this. I'd actually never heard of it before, so I'm not sure how popular this was. But then in October 2003 and April 2004, the Kill Bill movies released. There's two of them. There was another increase right when those released. And so looking over this whole time frame from 1993 to 2000, there was a 1000% increase in the name Uma, but then from 2002 to 2006, there was a 131.43% increase. Overall, that whole time frame was a 1,520% increase. And out of curiosity, I looked up the name of the daughter of Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman, Maya Hawke. You might know her from Stranger Things. She plays Robin. There's actually no impact because of her birth, like some other celebrity babies I've seen, because the name Maya was already increasing pretty sharply. You wouldn't have noticed it. If you're around the 2010s, you might remember a band called One Direction, one of the members of which was named Niall. And Niall is an Irish name, possibly meaning fury, passion, or cloud. And in July 2010, One Direction became a band. They're kind of like formed. They're like a basic boy band. But the popularity of the name Niall increased sharply after 2010. It increased 283.33% from 2010 to 2013 and has continued going upwards. Another member of One Direction is a person named Zayn. And Zayn is an Arabic name meaning beauty or grace. And again, in 2010, One Direction became a band, and almost immediately, there's actually like maybe a 1 year gap, but almost immediately it really started to go up drastically. It really started to go up drastically, and it's kind of still going up from around 2010. And so from 2010 to 2024, there is a 2,995.65% increase. I did try to look up the other members of One Direction, whose names I don't know all of them off the top of my head. I was not into One Direction. One of them I know is named Liam. Obviously, Liam's been like a top 10 name since about 2012, so there would have been no impact if people were naming their kid Liam after the One Direction. Next, we got Dustin and Dustin Hoffman, an actor. So Dustin is from an Old Norse name meaning Thor's stone. And in December of 1967, a movie called The Graduate was released. And immediately following that, there was a massive uptick in the number of babies named Dustin. Whereas before that, there was just like a couple a year. If I remember correctly, this was maybe like 50 a year. And so from 1967 to 1985, there was a 20,374% increase in the popularity in the number of babies named Dustin. And for girls in that time frame, it increased 8,000%. And that's how I like to tell when someone had a real effect on baby names, is when you have like a man named Dustin who obviously made there be a large increase in the number of male babies named Dustin, but he also made there be a large increase in the number of female babies named Dustin. I originally looked this up because it was the name of, I was looking at the names of Stranger Things characters, and there's a character named Dustin. Now, this show takes place in the 80s, and it like starts in the early 80s with like some 12-year-old characters, one of whom is Dustin. And if you do the math, or if you look it up on the Stranger Things Wikipedia, as I literally just did, he was born in 1971. And so my headcanon is that he was named after Dustin Hoffman because if you think about it, he would have been born like right here, right in the aftermath of The Graduate. Next is Natalie and actress Natalie Woods. So Natalie is from a Latin name, Natalia, which means Christmas Day. And in October of 1955, the movie Rebel Without a Cause was released, and this was one of her breakout roles. And there was just a small increase right when it was released. Now, the name was far more popular around maybe 2005, 2006, but in the 1950s, there's still a sizable increase around the release of this movie. And so from 1955 to 1958, there was a 217.57% increase. However, Natalie Woods mysteriously died in 1981, right here, and there was another sharp increase right there. And celebrity deaths will be a continuing motif of this slideshow as we dive farther. Next is Stevie and the singer Stevie Nicks, who is a woman, whereas Steve or Stevie is often, I think, is maybe often associated with being a masculine name. So her name's actually short for Stephanie, which is the feminine form of Stephen, a Greek name meaning wealth. And in February of 1977, the band Fleetwood Mac released their album Rumors, which became maybe one of their best known albums. That's what this gray line is here. There's not much of an increase there. I'll admit to that, but in 1981, Stevie Nicks released a solo album called Belladonna, and that caused it to increase just a little bit sharper. And so the total percent increase from 1976 to 1981 is 728.57%, and from 1981 to 1988, it was 586.21%. This is the first athlete I have on here, Shaquille and Shaquille O'Neal. So Shaquille is a variant of Shaquille, which is an Arabic name meaning handsome. And in 1989, he started playing basketball at LSU, which I think is Louisiana State University. And as you can see from this graph, this is an insane increase. So from 1988 all the way down here to 1993 all the way up here, that's a 178,400% increase. It started at zero. Like even when he was born, there were not five Shaquilles born in the year he was born. So he was maybe the only one. And in this same time frame, this same quite narrow time frame, it increased 12,500% for girls. And the name first appeared in 1989 when he started playing basketball at LSU. Next is the name Sheena and the singer Sheena Easton. Now, I actually don't remember why I looked up this name. I think I saw it somewhere on some list of like names with really big increases on like maybe behindthename.com or something, and I thought, oh, Sheena is a punk rocker. That was released around 1980. It must be that. In fact, no, Sheena is a Punk Rocker was released in the 1970s, but Sheena Easton released a song in 1980. Anyway, Sheena is a Scottish Gaelic form of Jean, which is related to John, which means Yahweh is gracious. Anyway, in 1980, Sheena Easton releases Modern Girl, which is probably like her hit at the time. And so the percent increase from 1980 to all the way up here in 1984 was 2,391. Stranger Things is starting to become an unexpected motif as well, but Winona and Winona Ryder. So Winona is a Dakota name meaning firstborn daughter, and in July of 2016, the Netflix show Stranger Things released. And even right away, it was released in the middle of the year, but even right in 2016, there was still an increase in the number of babies named Winona. And so the percent from 2016 to 2024 is 452.17%. And this name is still increasing. I am going to keep an eye on this name. Anyway, so from 2016, when Stranger Things was released in the middle of the year, to 2024, the name has not stopped increasing. and it has gone up 452.17%. Additionally, the long-awaited season 5 of Stranger Things, which I think will be the last one, is probably going to release later this year in 2025, in which case we might have to wait till 2026 data, but I have a list of names to keep an eye on, names that are currently increasing from things a few years ago, and this is going on the list. Additionally, just a fun fact, so Winona Ryder was apparently named after the city she was born in, and so, prior to Stranger Things, the name was not very well known, just less than 50 per year. I did look at the years of other movies, pretty big movies she was in that were released, like Beetlejuice or Edward Scissorhands, and there was no effect. It was Stranger Things. Stranger Things caused the increase. Well, I think one of the most famous singers of all time is Aretha Franklin, so let's look at the name Aretha. So Aretha is likely from a Greek name, meaning virtue, and in March of 1967, Aretha Franklin released the album I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You with a new record label. And this, I think, is really when she became famous around like the mid 60s. And so there's a really big jump here of the popularity of the name Aretha. And so the percent increase in just like 2 years from 1966 down here to 1968 up here is a 496.70% increase. And she had released several albums previously, but this was really her big one, I think. Another singer is a guy named Sean Cassidy. I was looking up different spellings of Sean, and this one had the strangest increase. So this is an Anglicization of Sean, which is an Irish form of John. In 1977, Sean Cassidy released his first album from less than 1,000 to just over 6,000. And so in just 2 years, that's an 870.80% increase. The other two most common spellings of Sean, Sean and Shawn, were decreasing that year. Another famous singer is Selena, who's just known as Selena. And so the name Selena comes from the Greek Selene, meaning moon, and is the name of the goddess of the moon. In 1992, Selena releases Entre a Mi Mundo, her breakthrough album. And while the name had a very slight increase in the years leading up to that, it really shot up once she released that breakthrough album, and then also very quickly dropped off, but stuck around at a higher popularity than before the singer Selena. However, just a few years after her breakthrough album, Selena was murdered by the president of her fan club. Anyway, the increase from 1992 to 1995, which is the peak actually, was 920,000%. The next name is LeVar, and the actor LeVar Burton. So LeVar is short for Lavardis, which is the name of Burton's father. And in January of 1997, the miniseries Roots airs. The show Roots is about a man named Kunta Kinte who is sold into slavery after being abducted from Africa. And LeVar Burton plays Kunta Kinte, the main character. As is plainly obvious, there is no data for the name LeVar previously. It's absolutely no more than 5 babies named LeVar in any years up to that. But this show comes out and it just immediately goes up to over 500 in a single year. So if the percent increase from 1976 to 1977 is 52,200%. And then it immediately dropped back down, and it has kind of lingered for a while, but in 2024 it finally did go back down to quote 0, which just means less than 5. And honestly, this is the first name I've found truly go from 0 to 500. 1977 was both the first year this name showed up and the peak. Another mononymic singer is Aaliyah, and Aaliyah is a feminine form of an Arabic name that means high or lofty. And in May of 1994, she released the album Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, which was her first album. And so the percent increase, if you look over here, there's obviously a little bit of data previously, but in 1993 to 1994, there is a 6,495.45% increase. However, Aaliyah unfortunately died in a plane crash in 2001, another mononymic singer who died quite young. But from 2000 to 2002, there was a 219.45% increase. And given that did peak around a few years later, I think it's safe to say that, like, as a singer, and maybe even as she died, she brought this name into the public view. Now, obviously, I looked up the name Bart because of Bart Simpson, right? But in the 1950s, there was a football player named Bart Starr. And so Bart is short for either Bartlett in the case of Bart Starr or Bartholomew in the case of Bart Simpson, which is the Greek form of an Aramaic name meaning son of Talmai. Bartlett is a last name that is a diminutive of Bartholomew. So I guess would Bartlett mean grandson of Talmai? Who knows? In early 1956, Bart Starr was grafted into the Green Bay Packers, and there was a very slight increase just the first year, and then it shot up around closer to 1957 and after that. So I don't know football, but I'm guessing he probably wasn't the most featured player in his first year on the Packers. Anyway, from 1956 to 1959, this peak, that was a 298.05% increase. Next name is Mariah, and the singer Mariah Carey. So Mariah is a variant of Maria and actually does align with the Old English pronunciation. And Maria, they relate to Mary, but Mary has an unknown meaning. No one's figured that out yet. In June of 1990, Mariah Carey's debut album was released, and there is a very sharp increase here. It actually had kind of increased the last like decade or so before that from basically nothing, but when Mariah Carey dropped that debut album, it shot up to over 5,000. And so from in just 2 years, from 1989 to 1991, there was a 1,201.25% increase. And it remained popular at the height of Carey's popularity, but it has decreased since and it hasn't come back. Now, I'd like to see if this big decrease here right around the late 90s into 2000s did align with the release of All I Want for Christmas Is You, but it does not align with that. But I mean, I feel like every November there's a meme of like unfrosting Mariah Carey with that song. So I was curious if there was maybe a reason that it had decreased so quickly right there. Now, if you live in Wisconsin and you're a fan of the Bucks, you've maybe heard of Giannis Adetokounmpo. I am not up on sports. I've gone to one Bucks game because I do live in Wisconsin. I mean, everybody knows this guy. And I only looked out to look this up because I realized that the reason every Bucks jersey I see people wearing has a number 34 on it is because that's his number. So Giannis is the Greek form of John. Again, back to John, which is from the Hebrew name meaning Yahweh is gracious. In September of 2016, Adetokounmpo has his breakout season with the Bucks, and in 2017, he was the youngest player in an NBA All-Star game. But while Giannis is not an overly popular name, it only peaked at just above 160. It did go up really fast. So from 2015 to 2022, that's a 16,100% increase. Additionally, he first started playing in 2011 for a Greek team, but only in 2013 did he start playing for the Bucks. Another Bucks player, I don't remember why I don't remember how I know this guy's name, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is another Bucks player. So Kareem is an Arabic name meaning generous or noble, and in 1970, Abdul-Jabbar started playing for the Bucks, and they got many victories. He was good at the basketballs. And I don't know how sports ball works, but the Bucks had 66 victories in the 1970 and 1971 series, and that sounds pretty good. And so the percent increase from 1969 to 1972 was 37,700%. There was only like just a couple blips of data in the couple of years leading up to him, but it's actually remained in the data since then, having maybe around 300 boys named Kareem per year. He did start playing for the Bucks in 1969, but there was no data that year. If you can't tell, this is just a part of the slideshow where I was Googling basketball players. So Kobe and Kobe Bryant. So Kobe is the name of a Japanese city and a type of beef. And in 1996, he started playing for the Lakers, and there was immediately a big increase. This name is probably the most popular of the last three basketball names we've looked at, and so it increased rapidly, increased further again, then it dropped off quite a bit. But then in 2020, it increased a lot really fast. That's because in January 2020, he died in a helicopter crash. And so the percent increase from 1995 to 2001, which is just when he was playing basketball, was 17,144.44%. And the percent increase from 2019 to 2020 is 199.80%. On to the next section, which is a lot shorter. This is just other well-known people. So there's a couple things here. These are either the names of people who are famous but not necessarily a celebrity, or somebody who is the child of a celebrity, where the name began increasing immediately following maybe a political event, an election, a war, or a birth. This is the second oldest name on here, Dewey, and Admiral George Dewey. So Dewey is possibly a Welsh form of David, and in May of 1898, there was the Battle of Manila Bay, where Admiral George Dewey had something to do with the victory achieved by the Americans in the Spanish-American War. I'm also not up on military history. So percent increase from 1897, which is just the year of what happened, to 1898 is a 605.7% increase. Now it was already increasing a little bit, but maybe he was doing other military stuff before that. And in that same time frame, just 1 year, girls increased 700%. Next name is Shiloh and Shiloh Jolie. And this is a case of celebrities having a baby and then people name their baby that same thing that the celebrities name their baby. And I originally looked up this name because it's the name of a sea shanty. It's probably like the third time I've looked up the name because of sea shanties. Shiloh is a Hebrew unisex name meaning tranquil, and in May of 2006, Shiloh Jolie, the daughter of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, was born. And while there was a little bit of data from around 1970, it really shot up after she was born, and so the percent increase from 2005 to 2009 was 504.76%. That's just this bit right here. It has been increasing quite sharply in the last couple of years. I'm not sure if there's a reason for that. As I said, this is a unisex Hebrew name, and so in that same time frame, it increased 163.49% for boys. This is the oldest name I have on here. Garfield and President Garfield, which is notably his last name. So Garfield is an Old English surname meaning triangle field. And on March 4th, 1884, President James A. Garfield was sworn in to the presidential office. SSA data only goes back to 1880, and he was sworn in early 1881. So we can see 1880 was a little bit lower than 1881, but that it quickly dropped off after that. And I've looked at the names of every single US president. I didn't really make a video about it, but I have done that. And it's not during the presidency that a name is popular, it's during the election years, and it's generally the older presidents or the presidents with less common names that this happened with. And I think it's just because, like, leading up to an election, you're seeing a lot of, like, political stuff trying to persuade you to vote a certain way. But then once they're in office, like, you're not really going to see that much anymore, especially I think in the 1880s. Anyway, just a couple months later, President James Garfield was shot. He died months later in September because bullets were different back then. And so the percent increase from 1880 to 1881 is 20.49%, and the percent decrease from 1881 to 1884 is 39.59%. Now, I can't say that the decrease had anything particularly to do with him, but I think it's just that he was in office, it wasn't an election year anymore, so it just kind of naturally went down. I did look up several sources on whether President Garfield was well liked or viewed as a good president, and then and now he was viewed as a good president despite his very short term. Next, we have Chastity and Sonny and Cher. So Chastity is a Puritan virtue name, which is from an English word meaning pure, and generally it does refer to abstention from sex. And in March of 1969, Sonny and Cher named their assigned female at birth child Chastity. He is a trans man, and so his name is Chaz actually, but the percent increase from 1968 to 1974 all the way up here is 74,800% because there is no data for the name Chastity prior to the birth of their child. And you know what? Yes, Chastity is a name. It's been a name for a while, but I have opinions about this because of the whole, it generally refers to abstention from sex. Like, that's just kind of a weird thing to name a child. When you look into Cher's filmography, she was in a movie called Chastity or something, or like she played a character called Chastity, and that's probably where she got the name from. Also, remember this if you keep watching this video, because this name will return in a little bit. Now we talked about but in that same helicopter crash, Kobe Bryant's daughter Gianna also died. So Gianna is short for the Italian Giovanna, which also relates to John, again, the Hebrew name meaning Yahweh is gracious. So in January of 2020, she died in a helicopter crash with her father, Kobe Bryant. She was quite young, she was only like 13. And so the percent increase from 2019 to 2020 is 130.74%. Here's some other names I want to mention, things I looked up, but maybe the graph just isn't that interesting or there's not actually that much data for it. And I made this slide because I looked up, out of curiosity, I looked up the name JonBenet, which was given to 14 girls in 1997. And 6 more in 1999. If you're familiar with this name or why I looked it up, JonBenet Ramsey was a 6-year-old killed on Christmas Day, 1996, and the case is famously unsolved. And that's just what baffles me about this is you hear about a 6-year-old murdered, and then 14 people named their own child JonBenet. There's just some mental gymnastics there that I don't understand. Especially because JonBenet is such a unique name. Next is Morpheus, which was given to 5 boys in 2000 and 16 more in the years after 2020. Morpheus is Lawrence Fishburne's character in The Matrix from 1999, and Morpheus is also the name of the Greco-Roman god of dreams. Tippi was given to 100 girls from 1963 through 1974. Tippi Hedren is an actress who played the main character in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds from 1963, and her given name was Natalie K. Hedren, so Tippi was kind of like a stage name. That's her. Then Tahani was given to 413 babies from 2016 through 2024. Tahani is the name of a main character in The Good Place. It's an Arabic name that means congratulations. And her character actually says in the show her full name is Tahani Al-Jamil, and that means congratulations, beautiful. I do want to add there was data for Tahani prior to the release of The Good Place, but it did go up slightly after. Angle, not Angel, Engel was given to 1,149 girls, mostly during the 1970s and overlapping with the female popularity of the name Angel. I guess people just didn't know how to spell it right, but like that's a lot of people who did not know how to spell it right. Pistol was given to 19 girls and 63 boys from 2010 through 2017. A pistol is a gun. Do not name your child a gun. Please don't. Especially in this day and age, do not send a child named Pistol to school. Jasleen was given to 1,373 girls from 2007 to 2008. And there were only 34 from any of the years with data prior to that. And so Jazzleen is a combination of jazz and the suffix lean and is the name of the 8th winner of America's Next Top Model. Right, next I want to share some inexplicable increases. These are names where it went up pretty fast, but even after scouring the internet, I can't really find a Charity, which is a virtue name from the word meaning generous love, like you would give charitably. Now I have this line in 1969, but in 1968, or 1969, obviously something happened that caused it to go up pretty fast. And so the percent increase from 1968 to 1975, this peak up here, was 1,134.70%. And that's a pretty big increase. Now, this name is fairly common in certain parts of Africa, specifically like the English-influenced parts of Africa, but that doesn't explain it in the 60s. And so my leading theory is that it's related to lockstep individualism, which is a thing I learned about from a YouTube video. It was about names, but if one name is popular, other similar sounding names will become popular. So remember when I talked about Chastity and how that increased after Sonny and Cher named their child Chastity? Well, Chastity and Charity are both Puritan virtue names that start and end with the same sounds. And as I said, Chastity's kind of a weird thing to name a baby, but Charity's not as weird. So Chastity and Charity sound similar, and Chastity increased in 1969, and this increased in 1969. So I think, so while this one can't be certain, I think this one's pretty clearly related to the name Chastity and lockstep individualism in that Chastity got popular, so Charity got popular, because they both sound similar. Next name is Hal, because I was watching Malcolm in the Middle and Googling the name of the characters. That's how I came across Dewey. But Hal is a diminutive of Harry, which is a variant of Henry, a German name meaning home ruler. And as you can see, in both 1945 and 1954, there were some pretty sharp increases. And so from 1945 to 1949, it went up 92.4%. And from 1954 to 1956, it went up 43.75%. And so there may not be a reason for this one. This one maybe isn't as clear as some of the other inexplicable increases. They went up pretty fast, so I feel like maybe there's something. Maybe it just wasn't super popular. People didn't like the name Hal as much. Possibilities are Hal Clement, who is an author, or Hal Holbrook, who is an actor. I think this is Hal Holbrook. I didn't actually write that down. This is Hal from Malcolm in the Middle, and this is Hal from Space Odyssey, I think. Next name is Bellamy, which is from an old French meaning beautiful friend. And in 2013, I don't know, but that's when it first started having data for boys, and that's also when it started increasing pretty rapidly for girls. To find a solution for this, I literally just Googled Bellamy, and this guy popped up. He is a fictional character. He's a fictional character named Bellamy from The 100, which is, I think, a show, but the time didn't really line up, so I don't know. This is why it's in this part. If you think you might have a reason why any of these names increase, leave a comment. I want to know. Anyway, the percent increase from 2013 to 2021 is 44,600% for boys, and for girls, it's 629.41%. This name came about because I was looking up the names of a lot of different Native American tribes because of an unrelated project that I haven't done anything with yet. And finally, Mac with a C or with K or no K and question mark. So Mac is from a shortening of Irish and Scottish last names where the Mac part means son. So like MacDonald means like son of Donald. And in 1941, you can see both spellings. There's a pretty clear jump right there. And so percent increase from 1941 to 1942 for Mac with a K is 397.5%. And for Mac with a C, it's 93.55%. Now, there is an actor who's pictured here named Johnny Mac Brown. He appeared in 14 westerns from 1941 through 1942 alone, and he started acting in 1927. But from Wiki, it sounds like he got most famous in 1939. And so it's kind of hard to pinpoint, like, maybe if there was a specific movie, if it is Johnny Mac Brown, if there was like a specific movie of his that caused this. Because I don't really watch many 1940s westerns, but if you do, leave a comment. What's your favorite Johnny Mac Brown Western from 1941. And that's all the names I have right now. I have a list of way more to go through in future videos, so subscribe if you want to see more pop culture name videos. I watched The Hunger Games last night. I have like 7 more I gotta look up now. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something. If you want to watch the other videos in this presentation, I will link them in the description.